All right. So we're recording
On.
and we're starting kind of in medias res because we started a conversation that we didn't think we would bother to record. And then we were like, why aren't we recording this? So hi, I'm Jack.
We're off to the races
I'm
already.
Jelly. And
I'm Kyle Godby, and these are our field notes from the swamp.
okay, so what were we just talking about? We got to talking about veganism because
Mm-hmm.
I am vegan and I have been for 26 years.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I went vegan when I was a freshman in college. I did the vegetarian thing for a little bit before, and then I was like, why the fuck don't I just go full on this? And I can talk about more about that if we care. Why are we talking about this here? What does this have to do with complexity? What does this have to do with practice? So in what's going to probably come out weird because we did just talk through a little bit of this, but let's repeat some of the context and then try to like pick up where we were. We were talking about unrelated things when I brought up that I'm vegan, but veganism ends up being something that has a lot of parallels with things we talk about related to complexity informed practice. One of which is the notion of being vegan as like an ideological stance versus simply being one who chooses not to eat or buy animal products as choices that you make repeatedly. Mm-hmm. So it's not my whole personality. And I know I've said this to you and probably others have heard this. A lot of times people find out that I'm vegan very, very far into our friendship. And then they're like, oh my God, I had no idea. Obviously, if we go out to eat, they find out pretty quickly. But I take that as a compliment, not because I want to hide it, but because right. I'm not the butt of all those jokes about people who are vegan and they do CrossFit and whatever. Like, which thing are they going to talk to you about first? Yeah. And I have over the years, you don't stay vegan for 26 years without feeling deeply committed to some of the ethical reasons that are behind it, which I'm happy to chat through if it is relevant. Because there are a lot of reasons to be vegan. But I also think in order for it to be sustainable, it can't be that purist, ideological, militant kind of approach. If you want this to be something that you care about and stay committed to long term, it means you're not out there trying to evangelize constantly. And you're not either pointing out other people's choices as being wrong or bad, nor are you always drawing attention to your choices. Like, look at me, I'm superior because I am vegan. I don't do any of those. And it is not my explicit primary goal to evangelize or get others to be vegan. It would be great if the world were vegan because obviously the same ethical values that I hold for myself as an individual, of course, I would love it if everybody held them too. Otherwise, they wouldn't be an ethical stance. But I'm certainly not about to go out and argue that that is the choice everyone should make. And more often than not, when people interact with me, it's always a little bit later down the road when one person out of 20 will want to ask me questions. They'll want to know about why. They'll want to know about, well, what do you eat? So much easier now than 20 years ago. But it's not even really hard anymore to be vegan. Like logistically, the way it used to be. So there's a part of me that's like, kids these days have it really easy. We had to learn how to make all this crap from scratch. But right. I remember when I was first vegan, there were people who'd been vegan for 20 years before that. And I was like, wow, you aging hippies. What? Yeah, now I understand them. But anyway, so that's a little bit of context. Right. Do you want to interject anything? There's more I can say.
I do have a question. Yes. You said you don't try to initiate anyone intentionally. Yeah. Have you unintentionally? Has anyone in your orbit been pulled in?
Oh, like has anybody decided to try being vegan?
Yeah, or roommates or a coworker or anyone else that like through conversation just kind of said, I'm curious. I want to now I'm tipping into that world.
Yeah, I'll say more about that in a minute, but I also want to contrast it because one of the things you said off camera before we started recording was like you had some prior experiences back in the day.
Yeah, growing up in Woodstock, I'd be eating pizza and people would come up and total strangers. That was the opportunity. You're eating cheese. Let me explain to you how commercial dairy farms work. It's like, udder's full of pus or something like that. Like, come on, I'm eating pizza here. Just leave me alone. Like, I get a 30-minute break here at work. Right. I mean, like, come on.
There's definitely, oh God, this topic could be analyzed from so many angles. The rhetorical, the cultural, religious, like it's a philosophical thing first and foremost. But the rhetorical strategies that I think people have taken over the years, then I'll promise I'll come back to your question, is really interesting to trace if one cares. Take, for example, PETA, who, as far as I'm concerned, might as well be a wing of like the agricultural like the USDA or like the meat industry, because what they do is so counterproductive. And even in the heyday of like, I think late
Sure.
90s and early 2000s, when I would say PETA was whatever, everywhere in some ways, or there was an allegiance and an identity building around either animal rights or vegan or vegetarianism. So not just veganism, but the animal rights side of this choice. It just never sat right with me. And I actually sort of found my friends in the animal rights world by virtue of, we kind of would look at each other and be like, what is PETA doing? This is a spectacle that doesn't actually serve the greater good. They would claim that it does for reasons that they're right to, or, like we can all be right. But anyway, so I never bought into that way of thinking. And it makes me cringe just to think about all the strategies. And the pus thing just was very much a product of that, of PETA and other schools of thought, which was, let's gross people out. That way they'll recognize what they're doing is wrong and change their behavior. Like, actually, you want to think about the way that people in the complexity world have come to understand and talk about behavior, and behavior being an emergent property of context and behaviors and interactions and systems and people. Right. So if you think about what you're trying to do, if you're trying to change people's dietary choices and behaviors, it's a grand show of what not to do. Anyway, so the short answer, though, to your earlier question is yes, but I never really like made it an explicit goal. So just by virtue of being someone who did make those choices for myself, and I wouldn't go out of my way to cause someone to pay attention to me. But if someone was around me a long enough time, they would see that I was vegan. They would see the choices I was making. They might notice the ways that I either cooked or made food choices. And I did have people come to me. It's funny because the ones that come to mind are actually coworkers more than friends or roommates, because at work, you either sit in the kitchen at work or you go out to lunch or whatever you do for like the social kind of rituals. There would inevitably be a point where someone would be like, my God, we've worked together for 6 months. I didn't realize you were vegan. And I'd be like, yeah, and I wouldn't evangelize and I would just keep going. And then a little bit later, somebody would go, for various reasons, unrelated or related to knowing you, I'm kind of I'm curious about eating less meat. And we talked off camera about some of the various reasons someone makes these choices. Yes, there's the animal rights argument. Yes, there is the dietary, nutritional, health choice. There is the environmental, sustainability, climate kind of choice. And there's other subsets of each of those. And I never really asked why, but if somebody was like, I'm curious to learn more, that's when I would happily provide anything they wanted. Do you want some good recipes? Do you want some tips on navigating this at restaurants? Do you want some recommendations? Do you want resources besides just cookbooks? Do you want to learn more? Like, you're intrigued by the health benefits. Potential weight loss was usually like one of the common ones. Like, I want to just eat healthier. I don't know what eating healthier means. I kind of like that veganism has like a packaged name. It's easy to find things labeled plant-based now, which there is a difference between plant-based and vegan. I think most people would argue that the latter has some of that philosophical, ethical kind of stance to it. I would say most vegans, in addition to not eating animal products, also don't buy animal products. They don't try not to wear leather or wool. But, like, it's not a monolith. Some vegans eat honey, some don't, So anyway, but yes, the short answer is I did have people who, just by virtue of proximity to me, there was some level of influence through our interactions, and by making myself a safe and non-judgmental source of information, I very many times over my life have had the opportunity to share not just information, but perspective, and to then eventually become a source of encouragement. And I know a few people who either did they go off and become vegan? I have no idea, but they decided to eat vegan for a little while, or they wanted to just eat less meat, or just change their behavior, or they stopped buying certain products. Right. So I hope the listeners can see the parallels we're drawing to the complexity practice we're talking about all the
time. This is what I was honing in on, because this reminds me of, we've talked about this a few times, of just go in and do. It's not about you're doing it wrong speech. It's not about finding the soapbox and like putting big red X's on things.
You're doing it wrong.
Right.
slap the pizza right out of your hand.
Right.
Take your
There's pus
Newtonian
and
mechanical
yeah.
metaphors and get rid of them.
Yeah. Like
Your
and what
linear
you're
deterministic management theories are like pus. Is that going to
right.
work?
Yeah. How many like insults and ways of just I don't know, just patronizing people can we come up with in the complexity world? And it's easy. It kind of just flows in some cases, and I don't even know we're doing it. Sometimes when we're doing it, it just sort of comes out, and it does us no favors whatsoever. But when we just do,
Yeah.
I like to say nobody's going to ask us how the sausage. Sorry, vegans out there that we've stoked this. Nobody's going to ask us how the sausage gets made. Nobody wants to see that unless we make really good sausage and suddenly they want our recipe.
Yeah.
That's it. So we have to serve the sausage first. Um, or
Or they learn
the
how the
plant.
sausage gets made and they're like, wow, I want no part of this any longer. I want something
Sure,
different.
that's the vegan.
That's the better metaphor, in my opinion.
Yeah.
Um,
So maybe cookies. Nobody wants our cookie recipe. Nobody wants their cookie recipe shoved down their throats, or
Yeah.
they want to eat your cookies first.
Speaking of which, I am well known for vegan baked goods that are very good. So you can ask around.
I've seen a like influx of that in the world, and I'm surprised by it, and love that these new things are sparking.
Well, okay, so there's another really fun metaphor, because I think for folks who are not vegan, it's really hard to imagine something that isn't what they're used to. And it feels like, so when I was really young, when I first learned that veganism existed, I was probably in like elementary school. And I remember just seeing it like on TV or something. Maybe there was, for some reason, I feel like it was an MTV show. Maybe it was like a Real World where somebody was vegan. I don't know. But I remember thinking like, that's insane. That's insane. Those people are insane. Nobody lives like that. And I just thought it was so out of this world. And it's really interesting for me to look back and think about how part of that, of course, is influenced by the fact that I was a child. But the perspective I had at age 11 or 12 was such that a human who chose not to eat any animal products, not even meat, but dairy, eggs, that person's insane. Also, what do they eat? There's literally nothing.
Exactly.
There's no food if it's not meat, eggs, or dairy. And I then later, and it was college, it was, I had started to grow a little more interested, for reasons we don't need to get into, interested in animals, animal suffering, the practices of our food industry. And I was learning more and more, and I was tempted to go to become vegetarian. And I did. I became vegetarian for about 6 months. And I was like, why not just
good enough?
Like, what is the point? But it was never a performative, like, I'm not a good enough vegan. It was never an advancing sort of, I have to level up. I'm a level 5 vegan. I don't need anything to cast a shadow, right? That kind of thing. Like, it was never like I need to be even more, take me through the levels. What color belt have I earned? It was truly like, I'm finding this to be doable. I know there's a point where I didn't eat a lot of red meat just by nature, like it just didn't sound less and less good to me. And then I was also just eating chicken, and I was like, you know what, if I just cut chicken out, like what's the difference, and then it was so on down the road. So eventually I was like, I'll stop drinking milk, cow's milk, I'll replace it with other milks. And then I was like, all that's left is cheese, and I kind of don't really eat that much cheese. And like, yes, I know everyone's always like, cheese is the one thing I could never give up. Like, I get it, man. I was never a big cheese person, so I can't say I identify with how hard that is. But anyway, it's accompanied by having to replace it with other things. But the reason I bring this up is because it's so easy to think about veganism or choices that are different as being less, as being restrictive. And by pure definition, I am somewhat restricted. There are fewer things that I will eat than you, per se, maybe, given all things being equal. I'm sure there's things you won't eat that I will. But it's natural to just be like, it's restrictive. And then people use language like, I can't eat that. You can't eat that, Jen. You're vegan. You can't eat that. And I almost always correct in my head, sometimes out loud if it's a relationship where it's friendly and it's, worth doing. It's not that I can't. I don't want to. I don't want to. I'm actually enacting a choice, which gives me freedom, which is liberatory, by choosing not to do this thing. I'm not subscribing to a worldview which narrows my choices so that I can be in
Mm-hmm.
compliance with something that brings me purity and goodness.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like if you think about practices in work, in collaboration, in the working world, and how we manage our relationships and our teams and our companies and all the things you and I are always talking about in the field,
Right.
it's the same idea where I don't ever like malign a person for looking at other ways of working as like, that's crazy and foreign and weird and bad. Because I remember thinking that about people who don't eat meat. How could you possibly work differently? It seems so foreign to me because I cannot imagine the other ways that this could look and feel. I can't imagine a vegan chocolate chip cookie being better than a
Yeah.
non-vegan chocolate chip cookie. And my chocolate chip cookies have fooled lots of non-vegans. My chocolate chip
Okay.
cookies have won some awards. Like it's
Love
not.
it.
So that's my
Love it.
point is now, guys, I'm being very heavy-handed with the parallels about Jen being vegan, guys.
Right.
It's like you have to really understand too that like people simply, our brains just aren't really that good as a baseline at imagining something that isn't something we've already experienced or had kind of conveyed to us through years of cultural and like social sort of passing norms and rituals down. So it's like, if it's not something you've been around or grown up within or had a lot of exposure to, how on earth could it be even remotely possible to you that a cookie without eggs is going to actually taste good? You've never had one. How
Right.
could you think that?
I
So
can't
we are
imagine
up
it.
against that every time we
Mm-hmm.
want to bring in a new practice, every time we want to get someone to think differently, every time we want someone to be okay with uncertainty. You know what I mean? Anyway.
Yeah. And I heard something else in there. Um, you were talking about the transition from vegetarian to vegan. How long did that take? Because it wasn't like it doesn't sound like you woke up one day and said, I'm going to make the leap. You were slowly removing components that,
Yeah.
and even when you say vegan, like vegan isn't a single thing. It's not a
Right.
checklist that either you're in compliance or not.
Yeah.
And so you were transitioning to a point where you are now comfortable saying I'm
Yeah.
vegan, but
Yeah. Even
what
now
was
it's a
that? How
moving
long did
target.
that take?
Yeah.
Sure.
So, well, and I guess so to answer that, I'll give this context and forgive now because I can't remember what all happened before we hit record and what after. So if we're repeating things, you guys can just fast
Mm-hmm.
forward. But for what it's worth, vegan has some implications beyond plant-based. And there are like reasons, as I mentioned, I know previously, there's the ethical sort of animal rights component. There's the planetary, environmental sustainability, water, environment, et cetera, et cetera. There's also lifestyle and health. On top of that, even within the word vegan, it's not a monolith. There are some vegans who will eat honey and some who won't, because it has to do with how you approach what counts as an animal, and then why is it that you care. If your reason for being vegan is animal rights related, which it is for a lot of people who choose the word vegan rather than plant-based,
Mm-hmm.
then where do you draw the line on what is animal suffering? Why animals? Why not plants? There's a whole world out there too that we're increasingly learning that plants do engage, they feel, they sense. So there's never going to be the line. The line is going to always be not only a little shifting
Right.
from life experience and from person to person. The line itself is a fuzzy zone. It's not a line. There are a lot of vegans won't buy leather or wool products,
Mm-hmm.
but if they owned them before they decided to become vegan, depending on how they feel about it, they might keep wearing those things until they're worn out, because that might be the
Mm-hmm.
more sustainable choice to them. That's personally what I did, rather
Mm-hmm.
than throw those away and then go buy new things just so I could be in compliance with my vegan lifestyle. When in
Right.
reality, my personal values were that I also wanted to honor the life remaining in those materials. And I didn't walk around feeling like I was wearing like the dead carcasses of animals on my feet. Like I had people lobby at me. They'd be like, "Oh, you're vegan?" For a long time, that was the first thing. "Oh, you're vegan?
Mm.
What's that belt made of? What are your shoes made of?" Trying to like gotcha,
Yeah.
So there even that's a fuzzy thing. So to the point about the transition, it kind of was an overnight choice when it came to the point where I was like, I'm doing this.
Mm-hmm.
But the thinking about it was like maybe 6 months, but I mean, it's not the time period that matters here. It was me gaining first awareness, learning, and not just learning about the treatment of animals or the practices that were out there that didn't sit right with me. It was then also a bit of like negotiation around, how much do I care about this? Where does this sit in the things that I care about so much that I want to act or not act on them? You know, like power rankings in football, things moving up and down week to week. Right? So,
Mm-hmm.
and then it was a process of learning and exploring. And I think for many people, this is always social. That's a weird thing to say. For many people, this is always social. For many people, this is often social,
Right.
but it doesn't have to be. But it's definitely, it was in the context of who I was around and where I felt safe to explore. So, for example, if I was with my parents and chose not to eat meat at a meal, they were not the kind of parents who were going to be like, why aren't you eating a burger? What's wrong with you? Oh, you're one of those. Oh, you're a college vegan now. But I had friends
Right.
who had that experience. And I had friends whose parents were the other way around, where they were like, oh my gosh, this is fabulous. Let us help you figure out how to cook for yourself, or let's all try to eat less meat as a family, or whatever. So, and then same
Mm-hmm.
thing with friends. If you had friends who were already vegan curious, it made it a little bit easier. So I probably spent, and for me, it was probably triggered by being away from home. So I could make
Mm-hmm.
more choices in what I was eating because I wasn't having meals cooked for me all the time. Basically spent that first year out of the house kind of thinking about, okay, this is one of the things I now, as an independent adult, have a little more agency over. And on top of all what I've been doing to learn, I'm going to start experimenting with, okay, well, I'm not giving up burgers altogether, but maybe I eat a little less red meat. Maybe now I'm going to give up the chicken. And for me, the place where there was more of like a tipping point was I'd already been doing some of these things in places where it was safe, or felt like,
Yeah.
well, why not? To just all of a sudden one day being like, what's the difference between me today and me calling myself vegan? Oh, you know what? I'm going to quit eating cheese, or whatever the last thing was.
Mm-hmm.
And then after that, I was like, okay, I think I'm vegan now. And being vegan
Yeah.
wasn't like, now I'm a master of being vegan. It was basically like going from having a learner's permit to a driver's license. I was basically like allowed to keep going on my own, not allowed, but
Mm-hmm.
like that same metaphor. And I kept learning, and you get very good at scanning ingredients on labels. Like at this point, I don't even have to pick up a label on most ingredients. Like I already know, but you very quickly scan to find out. You have to make your ethical choices. Do I care about honey or not? Do I care about a lot of the ingredients that are not whole foods, but like there are certain food ingredients that come from animal sources? How much do you care about those? And the choice of how much you care about those is never just, is it vegan or is it not? There's a personal calculus. I might
Mm-hmm.
personally care about this one, but not that one for some who knows personal reason, or social. I might not actually care about this chemical whose name I can't pronounce, but I know that all of my friends who are also vegan don't eat that because it's on the list of things that come from animals. And if I choose to eat it, I jeopardize my power, my standing, or my social relationships, right? Which you
Sure.
can have empathy with that, even if you don't want to say you shouldn't be performative in your choices. So there's the answer that, again, I think probably sparks some parallels. I mean, maybe the moral of the story here is that if you are discovering systems and complexity, ways of working, or if you're a longtime practitioner of these things, try to remember that like asking someone to work or think differently about the environments they're in can feel as downright foreign and threatening as telling someone who loves steak, you got to become vegan, man. Like it doesn't work.
Right.
You're not going to just say, hey company, we're transitioning from a steakhouse to a vegan restaurant. Like it's a lot for some people emotionally to work through.
Yeah. Well, what I just heard was you go through an inventory of constraints and affordances and
Nice. Nice.
interdependencies, and how co-regulated that whole
Yeah.
transition and structure
Yes.
was. It wasn't you. Yes, you had a degree of agency to say, this is a path I want to go down, but you were also, like, if you were in the military, you'd have very different options. If you were in a place where they didn't list ingredients on things, you'd have different
Absolutely.
options.
Absolutely.
If you were surrounded by people that were uh, uh, supplying you food, or you were sitting at a table with people regularly and they were the ones that were saying, I don't support this, it's not available. If the education or the exposure wasn't there, all of these things are enablers to this. And yeah, all of those there was a harmony that created this ultimately. And the other thing I heard was how you said it's not monolithic. This is how I've talked about my quitting smoking. It's another lifestyle change that required there were a lot of relationships that were involved in that. One was me no longer living with a smoker, me actually being disgusted by living with a smoker and seeing somebody that smoked a lot more than me and was becoming very unhealthy, and not being there myself, but sort of seeing
ghost of
the writing on the wall.
yeah.
And then seeing older folks in my wife's family getting sicker and more unhealthy, and kind of like, shit, this is my future. I like breathing naturally. I'd like to preserve that, but also, like, I got laid off at one point, and like having that job, at 10 o'clock every morning, we all went out and we had our smoking circle, and that was my social group, and that's how we kept connected. And that was, when I talk about this now, I say smoking wasn't a habit. Smoking was a constellation of habits. One of them was smoking at 10 o'clock every morning when I was at work. One of them was smoking on the drive into work. It took me almost 2 years to eliminate them one by one, some of them by choice, but some of them, getting laid off was not by choice, but it was removed for me. When my wife and I first moved in together and she said, "You're not smoking in the house anymore," that was a choice removed from me. But I also said, well, I don't feel like sitting on the porch and smoking all the time, so I'm just not going to do it anymore. But it was that these massive changes that we're also proposing and that we're imagining do not happen by some individual making some determination. It is this great orchestration that is not orchestrated from the center. Orchestration is the wrong word. It is just it's truly the stars aligning.
Yeah, it's the interaction of a number of different factors that all have probably a certain, like, error bar kind of size, or a certain window in which they've all got to kind of happen to just be within for things to start to, because there are absolutely individuals who make these choices and just decide, but more often than not, you hear the multiple attempts until these things kind of like all line up in the right ways. And it isn't just, I mean, it's that fundamental attribution error concept where, we tend to associate things related to ourselves as being context influenced by all these factors, but for somebody else, it's just their fundamental character. It's a weakness. It's a willpower issue, right? But the reality is that it is always this extremely complex and dynamic interplay of factors. And so, yeah, I think that's a good example. It also strikes me too that the smoking example is a great one to add to this in parallel. And I also laugh because think about smoking. Did anybody tell you can't smoke now? Remember that? It's like, not like when you go vegan, it's like, you can't eat meat. Like, you're not, blah, blah. I'm trying not to smoke. And people celebrate the choice not to smoke. And it's so interesting to think about. We won't take this too far because it's not all that relevant, but the difference between stopping smoking and stopping eating meat can have pretty equivalently beneficial impacts on your health. But they don't necessarily have the same social weight nor the implied benefit on relationship, the place and role that animal consumption has compared to like tobacco consumption, which happy to unpack why in some other non-complexity related podcast, because the way that we all engage with other animal and life on this planet is its own problem. But I just found that
that's turning in a weird way too. Like you were saying, it's now easier to be a vegan because you can find stuff real easily. It's also much easier to be a non-smoker. I'm not in bars where people are smoking all the time. I'm not in restaurants covered by smoke. In fact, my one or two friends that are still holding out and smoking, because most of my friends have quit now, like there's the, like, we're going to go do something. They're the ones that are like, I have to go outside and we have to make special arrangements. they might as well be vegan. They need the right place, the right conditions to be able to socially
They have to put
connect
the
with
mouth
us
out,
to
right?
support their
Like
habit,
people.
right? Their lifestyle choice directs all of our destination at the end of the day. And so
Yeah.
it, but yeah, they're the outlier at this point.
Well, it's interesting too. The other thing you mentioned just in passing too about, and we can come back to this because there's something in the experience that I think is similar to people who, again, discover or learn about complexity or systems oriented stuff. Is that you kind of can feel both enthusiastically excited, like you've unlocked something, meaningful, that you're really
Mm-hmm.
excited to find others who share whatever it is. And there are a lot of people who take complexity, which is a field, a study, and turn it into a value worldview system. And that isn't what it is, but people do confuse the two. And I think that happens with depending on choices around veganism and other lifestyle choices.
Mm-hmm.
But there, like I said to you before we hit record, I have been making this choice for 26 years. I don't really actually even think of myself as a vegan. This has a lot to do with that, like, the language choice between being an identity first kind of I am a this versus I make
Mm-hmm.
choices like this. So
Mm-hmm.
I am vegan. But I don't really think I am a vegan. I don't think about that. That sounds weird. And also, I'm relatively willing to make small compromises. You mentioned like one of the things if you were in the military or places where you couldn't check ingredients, right? There are a lot of times where I don't have the ability to like know in advance what's going into the food I eat. If I'm at a restaurant and it turns out there's some Parmesan cheese on something, instead of making a big deal out of it, or sending all that food back to be wasted, I'll just push it to the side and eat around it. And I make those
Mm-hmm.
choices. Another vegan might consider that a compromise that either is or is not one
Right.
they'd be willing to make. There are other vegans who will
Yep.
say, I'm a bad vegan based on the choices that I make. Like, that's fine. But my firm opinion is that in order for this to be a sustainable choice, it's a form of
Mm-hmm.
dynamic equilibrium, keyword dynamic. And so that is how you make it sustainable and worry less about the black and white purist, this is good, this is bad, you're better now than you used to be kind of thinking, which I think is really, really hard for people to let go of. Even people who have studied complexity science or who can kind of understand the failings or the weaknesses of certain other ways of thinking and working, the way you manage systems and collaborations and the way you
Mm-hmm.
try to manage interactions. I just think that that's still very hard for people. It just takes time. I think a lot of people start off making a choice, whether it's quitting smoking or being vegan or trying to engage other humans in certain forms of collaboration that just feel novel
Mm-hmm.
or strange. And you kind of want to like do it by the book and make sure you're, doing the thing you're supposed to do by the thing and by the rules of the thing rather. And it's sort of over time with reps, with exposure, with proximity, it just starts to bake in, not unlike the things we've talked about in previous episodes about, learning to play an instrument. Eventually it's not something you have to think consciously about. It moves into the body and it frees up cognitive space for other things. I think it's not unlike
Right.
that. um, and I just think that the place-based influence on things like that, like there's so many interesting studies about addiction, to your point about quitting smoking,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
that like all of the veterans who came home from Vietnam, had been
Mm-hmm.
like hopelessly addicted to like, drugs of all types in Vietnam and really didn't have too hard of a time kicking it if they wanted. Not all, but like a
Right.
lot of it was placed in context and not just the
Yep.
chemical dependence that is built. So there is something
Exactly.
to be said for that context and for the factors and the social factors that influence you. And so think about that, won't you, if you're trying to engage
Yeah.
other humans in complexity informed practice?
Yeah, well, it's funny. Just before we jumped on this, I was listening to Peter Zion. I'm a fan of Peter Zion stuff, and he was talking about the different political conditions have sort of created societies that have long games versus short game approaches to things, and so. And he was using the example of the UK, is a been around for a millennium, and they know that bad leadership, bad economy, there's generally this sort of faith that things will come back around. There's more structure, there's more resilience there. But a place like Iraq, when the car breaks down on the side of the road, they strip the car because it is a very short game oriented society because it's been conditioned that way for a long time. I think with our enthusiasm and our first foray into this kind of work, we get some rejection, we get close, we get eager, we want to push hard. We have the short game in mind, and we're really looking for those immediate wins or to start piling up those quick wins. But the more time that we spend in it, it's not just that we're developing the sort of acumen or the comfort, but we're also kind of familiar with, like, we can sacrifice this one and keep a good relationship with people, maintain some influence, be supportive in other ways.
Yeah.
We can reference this in the future as what we could have done in retrospect and move on. Because I love what you were saying about enacting before. That's how I think about the participatory work. When I sit down and see there are people missing from the conversation, I don't think of participatory design as being something additive that we could do. I see there is a gap here, and we are missing insight, we are missing richness, we are missing opportunity, and we are creating risk for people that are not represented here that will ultimately bear the effects of their absence that we're creating. And so it's hard for me to accept the pushback when people are saying, yeah, but we don't have the time for that, or you're not going to find that person, or there are too many people, it's unrealistic, all of that kind of stuff. But sometimes I just have to, like, all right, well, the risk of them not being here is this. Is there somebody in the room that wants to accept that risk? I'm calling it out. Let's move forward, but let's revisit that risk as regularly as possible and figure out, do we need to call that person in?
Yeah.
And also, let's make sure that we're monitoring this so that in case there is an impact, they have a direct line to us to let us know, and that sort of thing is happening.
Yeah.
And that has also been a sort of muscle that I've had to develop over time, getting sort of like having people kind of say, well, if you can't invite people in, if you can't get exactly what you're looking at, what's your plan B? And me having to kind of sit down and all right, well, there has to be a plan B.
Yeah.
I have to be able to push the Parmesan to the side of the plates, and not just flip the table, because flipping the table doesn't get me invited to the next dinner.
No. And there are certainly environments or topics or domains or circumstances where you should flip the table. Let's I don't want anybody listening to this to be like, wow, Jen and Kyle are a bunch of like apologists for a bunch of terrible shit.
Right.
No, guys, trust me.
Yeah.
There are things we ain't going to put on the video here, but there's there are circumstances where you flip the table. But I think it is almost deliciously ironic that for a community, an intellectual community of people who probably for the most part would be sad how many people we work with are stuck in short-term loops of thinking, and we're always advocating for taking a longer view, for thinking about the potential for all the unintended consequences, thinking about the longer horizons of our work. Ironically, we do exactly what you just said, which is want to see the short-term change that we're hoping to get going in the way that we work, instead of, in some ways, eating a little bit of our own dog food and recognizing that those horizons are often longer. And if we are also going to operate with a longer kind of time span in our own minds, that does change a little bit of our approach. Again, that doesn't remove the urgency for things that are immediate. She says, gestures vaguely at the United States right now. But there are sort of the bigger topics that we can allude to broadly around collaboration and work that the way I like to think about it is it's a perfect example of that concept of the adjacent possible. Like if I'm trying to achieve or trying to help others engage in ways that I know bring more voices and more perspectives, and then ultimately improve the impacts that we have, if it doesn't happen overnight, as long as we get to an adjacent possible that then unlocks more optimal things down the road, that is what this practice is all about. Which is not unlike, one of the things I used to get a lot. I mean, nobody bothers me about being vegan anymore because it's being plant-based is, had its trendiness. So it kind of like got people to lay off on this for me. And it's been long enough now that people are like, wait, she might actually mean it. But early on, the other thing that people would often say to me was, what do you think you being vegan is going to do? Like how many, hamburgers are you not eating? What big of a deal is that going to make, right? What impact does that have? Well, aside from the fact that actually not consuming meat is like one of the only things that actually reduces your carbon emissions, like a noticeable amount, like on par with like not flying, I guess. If I want to be smug about that, once in a while I see the various studies that highlight what kind of choices actually have meaningful impact on the environment, on climate, on other humans. I can get a little smug. Like, I see that. You guys should fly less. Everyone's like, yeah, we should fly less. Carbon offsets. Next one down, eat less meat. Everyone's like, nope, next. What's the next thing? And I'm over here like,
leave my bacon alone.
Right. But putting that aside, the reality is, yeah, I know that me eating however many, 1,000 fewer hamburgers in my lifetime, how many cows' lives is that saving? Somewhere PETA has a pamphlet that says how many cows' lives I have probably spared. Fine. But it ain't a lot. And for me, the key is not to think about it in those big, huge, global, holistic system views.
Sure.
It is, what am I having an impact on in the smallest, most contextually kind of relevant ways? So one, if I'm trying to change the way that we all as a society think about animals, that's not going to happen for me, on par with launching a billboard campaign or trying to build awareness. It happens by having one-on-one conversations with people. Think about this conversation. I don't know what impact this will have on you. I don't expect you to go vegan, but I don't know, maybe sometime you'll make a choice to have a salad over a hamburger. I have no clue. It doesn't matter. But repeat that over the number of people over the years that I might interact with. And then on top of that, it's less about me wanting to get other people to change what they do. And it's more just knowing I've made this choice. This choice for me is a more like this, less like this situation. I want there to be less animal suffering, less animal consumption. And I don't want to be personally, as much as I don't have to be. I mean, we're all complicit and can't completely extract ourselves from all the various forms of harm. But in the places where I do have some agency, I want to enact it in a way that makes a choice not. So for me, that choice of, I said earlier, it's not that I can't, it's that I get to choose not to engage in these things that I consider to be unethical and harmful. And just knowing that if it is only a single cow whose my meat eating has saved, it's not a cow. There's no cow out there, Bob, who was spared. Bob the cow is getting slaughtered regardless. But it is to an extent the small, local, place-based change that has that power to be a line of flight, to think about the change in this assemblage that is meat eating and animal consumption. So again, heavy-handed, you guys don't care about the veganism as much, I'm sure, as think about your practice in that way to get people to get away from, oh my God, I've now started to think in systems. Okay, so I can see the system and I now want to find the leverage points to change the system, is where so many folks get stuck and they despair because you can't do that. And it's finding, I think if you can find the same kind of peace and conviction that I have being an individual who does not consume animals, and yet I don't make it my goal to evangelize and convince everyone around me to do the same, you can eat a steak in front of me. I don't care. Like, you know what I mean? I'm a realist, but I am very at peace with and happy to know that my choices are what they are, and that there are places that I have seen, and there are places that are not even visible to me where my choices have had an impact on other people around me, who in turn, their choices have an impact on people and animals and so on and so on and so on. So thinking about your complexity practice in that way, I think can be really, useful, fruitful to ask yourself like what that means, as an individual. It's really easy to get down. If you've got a voice in your head doing what all those people did to me as an early vegan, you think you're vegan, your shoes are leather, what's the point? Or you think you're saving animals, you're not going to change the like factory farming, like structure in America overnight.
Right.
Okay, but I can make small incremental acts towards that.
Yeah. It's fascinating because I think there's those of us that get into this, we have a sort of an interest, if not an ability, if not an innate sort of function that allows us to connect a lot of dots and see multiple orders of connections. I hear that a lot from folks, that they feel like they're gifted with that capability. And so, yeah, to go down that sort of loop of, like, I have a lot of stuff that's plastic and has refined metals in it, and everything around in my office right now is loaded with that stuff. And it was refined by people that are suffering all of the sort of conditions to create that stuff that we've exported outside of the country, so that we can have
Yeah.
green front lawns and clean air here. And we're complicit with that every single day, and totally ignorant to it. In most cases, we can crush ourselves under the futility of examining that too closely. It's interesting to think about where we do actually get a hand in things. I met a woman on a warm data in a warm data conversation months ago. She worked at a camp in DC where they brought kids from Liberia and Senegal, and places where they've got a lot of kids that are recruited to fight the wars there, the civil wars. And they're like, 12, 13-year-old kids that the intent is, don't be there for recruitment, but come over for like 2 weeks and play with other kids and see that, like, humanize other kids. And the question after she was done with her story was, that's amazing. What do those kids do when they get back? And she said, well, they go back and they join the army. And she kind of like started to like get a little, quiver in her voice. And I had, I just finished reading Adam Kane's last book, and I kind of said, we know, though, as practitioners in this space, that the expectation is not that they're going to go back and be civil rights activists or anti-war activists, and that's not what you're creating in 2 weeks. But the best you can kind of hope for, or maybe like if you can get one of those kids to pause for a moment because you've allowed them to humanize each other, you've made an impact. And who knows what that pause leads to next, where that pause goes.
Yeah.
But that's the thing that you're aiming for. And
Yeah.
so that's sort of what I think we need to hold in this space is simple things like pause it. We're not going to go end the civil wars that have been going on for decades and destabilize countries. But we might be able to introduce a pause that might have other effects. And that is a start of something.
Yeah, there's two things that I'm hearing, and I want to pick up the thread. So I'm using my little pen and paper to make sure I don't forget both. One on the last piece, and then the other one I'll link back further. That idea of planting seeds and not always being able to know which seeds will germinate, if any, when, how far away, what it looks like, what impact it has. We've talked about that on this thing before. And I do think it is hard because we all want to see the impact of our own hands in the world. But I do think it's huge. And this reminds me of one of the things that I used to be involved with more actively. It's actually not even as necessary anymore because there are fewer circuses. But when I was young, as I can't remember if I said this before the recording started or after, but of all those various reasons that you are vegan, for me, the original reason was animal rights. I did not become vegan because I cared about my health. It was in like college. I didn't care.
Right.
And I did obviously care about the environment and the climate and climate change, but it was the animal rights part. And so I was involved in other forms of animal rights efforts that weren't just the food or the products that I buy. One of which was being involved in different forms of activism. And one of those was handing out flyers and protesting at circuses. And so when the circus would come to town, and these are circuses that most of the circuses that involve animals, listeners, you should know, are awful for animals. Awful, terrible abuse. This is why you see them fewer and fewer now, because of efforts that have happened for years to reduce them. There are so many amazing things you can see at other forms of circuses. So regardless, we would go and there would be a number of us and we would protest, and everybody had their different like MO for protests. Some people just wanted to hold up a big old sign and just be belligerent and be adversarial and just yell at people and be like, you know, whatever. And that was never my thing. So usually when people would set up doing that somewhere, I would find my way over to a different entrance or to a quieter spot. I have my pamphlets, my leaflets that we would create that would basically just say, did you know that the circus you're heading into today does these terrible things? Did you know? Simple as that. And if you are at all concerned about that, we invite you to learn more. We invite you, if you don't like what you learn, to choose not to support this circus in the future. Maybe even join us in advocating for some updated policy. You know, there's a bill in the House that we have proposed or that has been proposed that we support or whatever to outlaw this or change that, whatever. So the reason I bring this up is not only just the planting seeds part, because there were lots of times where people get adversarial. People would be walking in and they would be like, you bleeding heart liberals, like you animal rights, blah, blah, blah. I love the circus. I'll keep going to the circus till the day I die. And I would be like, great, have fun. But I would usually find a few people who would quietly come up to me, take a pamphlet and just say, thank you, I'm going to read this. And I could see that they were already maybe walking in with a little bit of some reservation. And there were people who were like, oh my God, I've just literally never thought about this. And, and they would say, is this even true? And I'm like, it is. There's some links you can look at on the back or whatever. And I, every once in a while, would have someone who would actually stop and have a conversation with me. Once in a blue moon, somebody would actually read or interact with us and not go in, which was amazing. And I think everybody's like, North Star vision, but like that was never realistic. But I would have people that would come in, stop and actually talk to me. If they had a family, they couldn't stop for very long if they've got like 3 kids in tow. But they would say, thank you. I don't think we're going to come back. And one of the things we always recommended wasn't just learn more, do more if you don't like this. Also just take your kids to Cirque du Soleil or some other, forms of things like that are different forms of entertainment, like acknowledging that the circus provides different things to different people. So now take this metaphor, replace circus with ways of working that you don't think are healthy for the world and like how you get there. If my goal was that circus shut down today, A, that ain't realistic. B, there are a lot of people employed by the circus. There are a lot of people who rely on the circus and the systems of circuses for entertainment for their children or, cultural like norms that have been built around, we're a circus town. Like, I'm just like killing the over here. But I always think about how those people stick with me to this day who stopped and listened, and I could see that they actually took it in. And I had people sometimes come out because we would stay till the end and get people on the way out as well. That we had people come out and say, I thought about this, or I read it while I was in there, or, they would take a pamphlet on the way out and say, oh my gosh, I think I'm not going to come back. And once in a while we'd have people reach out because we had our contact info on there, and, we'd have conversations with people. And that is the kind of thing, to your story about these children would go back and enlist or, join the armies or what have you. Like you might be able to engage with a leader in your organization who is like, your ideas are intriguing and I subscribe to your newsletter, and then turn around the next week and go engage in exactly the kind of leadership activities. You're like, what the hell? Did you not hear or do anything we talked about? But the reality is it's a long game. And try to think about your practice as a person who in some ways is like handing out leaflets at the circus, and not a guru coming in, helping everybody change their mind and their behavior overnight. And I think that's helpful because it's lost in these conversations. You and me on this podcast or whatever this is are always saying long game, adjacent possibles, don't be that you're doing it wrong guy, just be a safe space,
small moves,
explore new thinking. But the reality is that's one way to be. It's kind of a good core way to operate, but there is still room for other forms of intervention. There are still, like I was saying with the veganism, take the animal rights thing. I make personal choices not to eat or buy certain things, but I also make myself a safe person for others to come up to and talk to if they're really interested in it, but they kind of are like, everyone in my life loves meat. I don't know. I also do other things and have done other things in my life that involve things besides my personal choices, like the circus and animal rights advocacy and activism. There are things that happen at large structural levels that you can advocate for or support in other ways that have to do with governmental policy and regulation. So thinking about the hierarchy, and this actually ties to the other point. So this is kudos to Jen for somehow bringing it together.
Thank
the
you
other thing that you were talking about that made me think of is that people really, I find, lose the fact that there are like maybe hierarchy was not the word I wanted there, but there's sort of like these different altitudes at which things be happening, and they're not mutually exclusive. They can be part of a portfolio of approaches or things that you are involved in, some to more, some to less extent, depending on your stance, your position, your leverage, your power. And I think it is easy for us to lament or despair when we really pay attention to everything that can be, should be done and isn't being done. We can shut down because it is terrible, frankly. But if you remember that there are things that are within your reach, whatever your position or stance is, there are things within your reach, and those things can have that ripple effect. I think that's really important. The thing to avoid is when folks start applying a hierarchy of issues, or this has to go first before that. In other words, the vegan thing comes up. This comes up a lot because people will be like, we care more about animals than people. Oh, you're vegan? You're implying that everyone should be vegan? Well, that's not very sustainable, because a lot of the vegan stuff that you buy and make isn't locally sourced. You're using up carbon on the trucks that bring your food over, or you know what? I can't afford to be vegan. And so if you're vegan, it's classist and racist for you to suggest that anybody should be vegan, because like on average, food deserts, and these arguments I'm saying with a caricature for a reason.
Sure.
But you get that. There are a lot of people involved in the more than human design kind of community who have complaints lobbed at them that you guys find it easier to care about animals and how our designs affect animals than how your designs affect poor people of color or LGBT plus folks, like in this community or that community or whatever. And it's not wrong. So I think as folks realize, you might find yourself able to either ethically, philosophically, emotionally, whatever it is, you might find yourself able to enact certain forms of choices that are on this topic more than that topic. And you can do that. It's okay. But it doesn't mean creating the hierarchy of the Russian, nesting dolls. You have to care first about this before you're allowed to care about this, or you have to make sure you're acting a certain way here and you're demonstrating your understanding of or care or compassion for this topic before you can do this one. And I find that to be tricky and problematic. It is okay to put more of your energy into something if it is the thing that you feel is closest within reach for you, as long as you're also still just interrogating where your blind spots are. And I don't, I might do more for animal rights than I might do, say, for, I don't know, the trans community, even though I care deeply about our, the trans community. But that's not because I think that like the bigger doll that we should solve first is animals and then trans. Do you know what I mean? It's partly just because I try to work with the tools that are at hand, and where I have the opportunity to support every other possible thing that is in the bigger picture of liberation and care and justice, I will. But it ain't a hierarchy, guys. You got to work with what's at hand.
Yeah. Something I wrote down that I don't remember what it was that triggered this exactly, but I think you were talking about us being able to relinquish being there for when those seeds actually sprout. But it kind of plays into everything we were just talking about. There's we talk about being egoless all the time, and some of that is a little patronizing and overdone, but the sentiment is halfway decent. The other part, though, and I know we've early on was very much, I was of the like, we need to focus on the practice, get our hands dirty, and you were kind of saying, don't forget about the theory too, and we just get our hands dirty, and I'm now like leaning into, all right, yes, we need some theory too. A lot of that is another place that shows up is knowing that the butterfly wings will become a hurricane. Being comfortable with that will allow us to kind of go in and say, I'm going to do a thing. I'm not going to witness the impact, but I know that a thing has happened, and that will resonate in a way that I won't be present for, but I can feel good about walking away knowing that an impact has happened that will move, and What impact it will become ultimately, I don't know, but it will be something.
Yeah.
But there's also a degree of freedom, privilege, capacity, that affordance that
Yeah.
needs to be there for that. If I
Yeah.
was in a position where my boss said to me, deliver this thing or
Yeah.
else you're fired, I don't have the ability to kind of say, well,
Right.
I had a conversation that made people think, and you know what? This project might not be the way that I wanted it to go, but
Right.
maybe 5 projects down the road, it will. I'm going to get fired.
Yeah.
That's how that's
Yeah.
going to work. So
That's
again,
a
we're
really
back to
good
that
point.
harmony.
Yeah. I feel like that's one of the challenges too, is maybe sometimes it's also just a reminder for myself to be more clear with my own language about this, because to say, yeah, it's a long game, and you're planting seeds. We don't it's But that's in addition to, not in place of, whatever short-term game you are embroiled in, because the short-term game is often the container, the existing space that you have to do the work in which you're trying to play the longer game. So you still have to maintain the short term container, the trust,
Mm-hmm.
the relationships, the consistency in delivery. And within that, then know that that long term, or, those seeds you're planting. So, it's like you're asking people to kind of be doing both at once. Really, it's like multiple things at once. It isn't just two. And I think it's easy sometimes. Probably we do it here because we do use a bit of shorthand,
Mm-hmm.
to kind of like confuse the fact that it isn't just one or the other, and that most of the time you have to kind of keep doing both. And it's a luxury to even talk about planting seeds. You know what I mean? Like, on
Right.
any of that. And I'll say this, it's a luxury to, even in a professional sense, think about which things you care about more than others. Again, using these as metaphors or parallels.
Yeah.
What's your issue? Is it animal rights? Is it environmental sustainability? Is it climate? Is it water? Is it race? Is it sexism, misogyny? Is it trans and queer? Like, I've just listed like a kind of high level, kind of 5 or 6 social justice topics, right? Now, take
Mm-hmm.
each of those and replace those with aspects of working in collaboration, aspects of management, aspects of organizational dynamics. It's the same thing. You're going to have folks who, for various reasons, are going to just resonate with, or have the means or the tools or the proximity to these things that can actually lead to some small nudge or wiggle or change. And you aren't, at least in a professional setting, it's not realistic to expect yourself or anyone around you to be able to actually be weighing all of these things against each other in this like cosmic philosophical kind of conversation at all times. And so, if nothing else, like, give yourself and everyone else around you a little bit of grace on this. It doesn't like absolve anybody from the responsibility to
Mm-hmm.
do the right thing, to be ethical, to fight for what is right, to put your money where your mouth is, so to speak, to stand up for what you think is right. But I feel like we get ourselves stuck in this loop a lot, just on our own
Yeah.
side. Like, okay, we can have these philosophical conversations, but at the end of the day, if you're trying to actually just be in the world, give yourself and everyone else that you're with a little bit of grace, because this is kind of that spirit of like, yeah, I don't care if someone tells me I could never be vegan. That's fine. That's fine.
Right.
There's something else that you have the power to do that could materially improve some other living being's life. I know it. I know every single
Mm-hmm.
person listening to this has something
Right.
within reach that they can and hopefully are doing that can materially improve the living conditions of another life on this planet. I know it to be true. And I think you're probably working on it. And that alone is enough to join you up in this kind of practice without
Yeah.
weighing them against each other.
Yeah, and I don't want us to, because I think you said we're doing a bit of shorthand with this, to not gloss over what we do in our day to day. It is not the I'm going to plant a seed and walk away, and
Yeah. Yeah.
uh, there's we spend a lot of time saying, all right, we met last week and these were our questions. Now we're meeting again, and our questions are higher resolution. Before, we didn't know who might be impacted. Today, we can name 3 people that might be impacted. And now we're talking about, in this particular intersection,
Yep.
what might be the effect that's happening.
Yep.
And how do we get into conversation with those people so that we can better understand that? It's not your traditional KPI world. We're not living in the iron triangle sort of space, but we are registering those movements in ways that are evidence that allow people to see that there are footprints here. People have been here,
Yes.
and there has been movement. And that's sometimes that's it. We are going to leave before the footprints stop happening is probably a better metaphor than to say we just cast the seeds in the wind. And
I really like that. And I was just going to say exactly that. It almost sort of feels like, in addition to the seed, plant the seeds, let the seeds blow on the wind. Yes.
Right.
But there is the separate, but I think just as powerful, if not more so, notion of like, make the road by walking, right? That spirit of, I'm going to leave some evidence that somebody was here. Maybe it's not even a footprint. Maybe it's a broken twig. Maybe it's more subtle. Right. You know what I mean? But learning to leave small indications that other caring life forms have been here and you're on the right track. And at the same time, learning to both read those things and figure out where it's your turn to diverge or keep following or whatever it is. Man, we just got very poetic and very metaphorical there at the end. And
it always happens.
It's probably perfect because I was going to say I've got to run here for a meeting, but any last, do you want the last word if there is any?
I don't need the last. Usually I have the mic drop. You go ahead.
That was it. I thought your metaphor was perfect. That's why I wanted to just end it there. Also, go vegan.
Footprints.
Email me if you want some recipes. Yeah. All right. I'll stop there.
Rock and roll.